good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Thierry tells me it's night wherever he is. So welcome to the Gender Justice webinar organized by the Extractive Hub, Center for Energy, Mineral Law and Policy, University of Dundee. We have a diverse and amazing range of panelists. We have Dr. Francisca Kusi-Appiah, Dr. Jennifer Hinton, and Dr. Victoria Nalule. Previously, we were supposed to have Dr. Carol Nakli also joining us, but she could not make it. So apologies on her behalf. We hope to have an engaging meeting and engaging intellectual discourse. Please feel free to ask questions in the chat as we go along. Raise your hand if you have any question, any burning issues as we go along. I hope you can all hear me. Also, most importantly, I need to mention that the session is being recorded for those who will not be able to join us, and also for people to make reference in the future. So welcome. Welcome to all of you. Welcome to our panelists. They're all ladies who are doing amazing, phenomenal things in the industry, in the energy and extractives industry. Perhaps we could just give them a few minutes, or rather a few seconds, for each one of them to introduce themselves. I am a lawyer, so ordinarily seniority would go first, but since we have a panel of ladies, we are going to do a very random selection of who goes first. So Dr. Appiah, please introduce yourself.
Thank you once again. And thank you, Dr. Victoria, for inviting me to this wonderful program. My name, as she's already mentioned, is Francisca Kusi-Appiah. I am a lawyer by profession, called to the Ghana Bar. I'm also a lecturer at the University of Professional Studies, Accra Law School, and the acting head of department for public law.
I see her screen is frozen. Dr. Hinton, please.
Thank you for having me. I'm Jennifer Hinton. I'm not a lawyer. I'm the head of ESG, Environmental Social Governance, for an Australian mining company called Jervois Mining. In addition, and I'm here kind of wearing the hat of a group called Women's Rights in Mining. I'm the advisor on gender and mining to this group. And go to womeninmining.org, which will tell you more about us. But it's an initiative that's grown into a collaborative effort of international organizations, international civil society organizations, knowledge institutes, governments, and we're working together to secure commitments from stakeholders in policy and practice in the mining sector that focus on empowering women and girls and upholding their rights in the mining sector. In addition to that, I'm an adjunct professor at Carleton University in Canada, but I live in Uganda, and my background is more on the engineering side originally, geological and mining engineering, but I've worked in the fields of artisanal small-scale mining for about 2 decades. I got engaged in gender and mining in about 2003, and I've worked in quite a few different countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America, South America. So thank you for having me.
Honored to have you, Dr. Hinton. Dr. Victoria Nalule, I know many people know you, but for those who don't, please do introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So sorry, my video is not on at the moment. I'll put it on very soon. So I'll be stepping in for Dr. Carol Nakla. By names, I'm Victoria Nalule. I'm a holder of a PhD in International Energy Land Policy. I'm also the founder and executive director of the African Energy and Minerals Management Initiative, where I started the initiative of Women in Energy and Mining, and we reach out to different artisan and small-scale miners. Besides that, I'm also a research fellow at the Extractive Hub, based at the Center for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral and Policy, where we do lots of work on gender justice, and also we offer technical assistance to governments with respect to oil, gas, and mining. And I've also written a lot on issues concerning oil, gas, and mining. And I've covered issues of gender justice. I have my recent book chapter on gender equality in the mining sector. So yeah, that's a brief about me. Thank you very much.
Nice to have you. At this point, it's important to mention that Dr. Victoria Nalule is the organizer of this webinar and the Extractive Hub at the Center for Energy, Petroleum, Mineral Law and Policy as well. So I understand that we have many attendees who are not in the industry, but are keen to learn about the industry, and it is important that we start with the basics. So Dr. Hinton, what is gender justice? How would you define it? It's not easy to say what justice, it's easier to say what injustice is than what justice is. So please do tell us.
When I think about gender justice, I think fundamentally about equality in terms of sharing or the redistribution of power, opportunities, and access. And so when we talk about those things, about equality and power, we think about the things that actually give you power, influence, and authority. And those are things such as voice, representation, knowledge, skills, resources. And then we have to think about all the cultural and social norms and beliefs and values that can help you obtain power. I can speak a bit about what that looks like in the mining sector. I'm not sure if you want someone else to go into it now in terms of pure definition.
So Dr. Hinton says it's more about equal access to opportunities. Dr. Nalule, anything you'd want to...
And power.
And power as well, yes, thank you. Dr. Nalule, anything you'd want to add on what exactly, because there's no global definition on what this is. So any additions to make to this?
Yeah, like there's no definition of what gender justice is, but in reality, when we're looking at the mining sector and maybe the oil and gas sector, we want equal opportunities for men and women with respect to the energy and mining sector. With equal opportunities, we want women to be paid the same amount of money as men are getting. With equal opportunities and benefits, we want to see women to take up most of the jobs in the sector, because at the moment the sector is male dominated. So with gender justice, what justice basically entails is a fair share of the opportunities from this sector, and we can't have this share. We can't have a fair share if the sector is male dominated. So for me, there's no definition of gender justice, but the simple thing is to see fairness in this sector, whereby women are also well represented, not only at the professional level, but also we have to think about the unprofessional women who are involved in small-scale mining. How are they benefiting from the sector? I've done fieldwork research, and in most of my videos, they're on YouTube, fieldwork videos, you see that women will do lots of work, but they're not benefiting as much as the men are benefiting. And yet they suffer the negative impacts associated with the mining activities and oil and gas activities, including pollution. So with fairness, we want everyone to have an equal share of the opportunities and also an equal share of the negative impacts.
Dr. Appiah, please do introduce yourself. I think you were cut off in the middle of your introduction, and then we can proceed.
All right. Thank you very much, Cynthia. Okay, my name, as I said, is Francisca, a lawyer by profession, areas of interest, oil and gas, and electricity. And I'm a lecturer at the University of Professional Studies Law School.
Okay, nice to have you here as well. We were basically just having a discussion on what gender justice is. And Dr. Hinton, probably you could paint the picture for us on what the gender balance or imbalance is in the mining industry.
Yeah, I think I sent you just one slide that helps paint a picture, because I know some people might be more involved in oil and gas. Others might even be out of extractives. Yeah, this basically illustrates that actually in mining, we have a spectrum. So we have artisanal mining and small scale mining, which we've heard about, where you can have 3,000 people at one site, and you might have 60% of the people working are women on the left-hand side, and they are most basic technologies. I've been to sites where people have a rock to smash other rocks, into powder because they don't have a hammer. And then you go all the way along the spectrum towards medium-scale industrial mining, large-scale industrial mining, which are very separate from artisanal mining. You see is women's participation drops, and it drops significantly, especially when you start to formalize and you see small companies come up and more organization, more mechanization. So it's important to make those distinctions. I'm working for a larger company. We're not engaged in artisanal mining, but I have awareness of it. So in terms of redistribution of these benefits, that we heard earlier, and the opportunities that come out of mining, artisanal mining, you can have a lot of women at the site, but who has the power, who owns the equipment, who owns the pits and shafts, who are the leaders of, say, if there's a cooperative or association, those benefits and those power points are generally held with men. And if and when you formalize it, just sort of formalizes that power structure. Going to large companies, a lot of companies have been struggling for a long time and actually actively trying to recruit women, all the way from the mine site level to the board level, but we still only have maybe now 2020, I think it's about 15% of employment goes to women. And then we look at, say, at the board level, it's only about 18%, so 1 in 5. It's a big improvement in 10 years, but you can see how the distribution of benefits directly comes from that. And then across that spectrum, we have at the community level, whether it's a community impacted or benefiting from artisanal mining or large scale mining, it's who wins, who loses. Usually it's the people already in power who has a voice, say with a mining company in an engagement process, who's representing the community. And whoever represents obviously is putting forward their priorities, their grievances, their concerns, if it's a company scenario. And then this is another place where we need to look at redistribution of opportunities and power and benefits and disbenefits.
That paints a good picture that as you go up the ladder, clearly there is a disparity. Even where we have artisanal mining, clearly we have a disparity on where the power is. Dr. Appiah, please just paint the picture for us on how it looks like in the oil and gas industry. What are the disparities? What is it looking like?
Okay. Thank you. For me, as a lawyer, for us in the oil and gas industry, gender justice is a human right, and it's been an aspect of human rights. It means it's a means to ensuring gender equality in the oil and gas industry. And so far, the research carried out by different sectors, we have researchers from Oxfam, researchers from individuals, and researchers from the government as well. They all point to one thing, that currently, we have at least 25% of the employees in the oil and gas industry being women, compared to previously where we had between 5 and 10%. This has greatly increased. And again, since I'm a lawyer, I always take it from the perspective of the legal angle. So all these, the steps taken by various institutions or frameworks towards the ensuring that there's equality among men and women working in the oil and gas industry. Gender justice for us in the oil and gas industry means that trying to eliminate all inequalities which are produced at home, in communities, in the markets, on the national level. So in brief, that is what gender justice in the oil and gas industry means.
Clearly, we see that there is a disparity. There are improvements, but there's still a gender gap. Dr. Nalule, what can we attribute this gender gap to?
Thank you, Cynthia. So the gender gap, we need to, like I mentioned, different sectors face different challenges with respect to gender inequality. Now, I'll just share this slide, not really a slide, just a photo. So in this photo, this is one of our employees at EMI, the NGO that I lead in Uganda. So you see we're in the salt mines, and these are the women who are involved in salt mining. And you'll find that in most cases, yes, artisan and small-scale miners, they lack protective equipment, they lack gloves, they lack boots, they lack all the resources that they would need to carry out their activities effectively. But for women, it's worse. And in most cases, the gender gap is created by various issues, but one of them is the lack of finances, because the mining sector or even the oil and gas sector, like all other sectors, these are capital intensive ventures requiring large amounts of capital to be effective. But you find in most cases, women don't have access to this capital. They don't have access to the finances. So even if opportunities would be there, let's say in artisan and small scale mining for these women to take part in these activities, they will be restrained due to lack of these finances. Now, for instance, you'll find that a pair of boats is not very expensive. Like in Uganda, you can get it like, let's say, $3 or even less, but then the women work without boats. And why is that? It's because they lack the money to buy the protective equipment. And also the gender gap, it can be attributed to some of the negative impacts associated with mining or oil and gas activities and how they impact on both men and women. You find that women, in most cases, they suffer a lot with respect to these negative impacts. I'll give an example for salt mining in Lake Katwe in Uganda and also in other African countries. You find that women who lack protective equipment, they are exposed to ammonia gas, which negatively impact their reproductive system. It negatively impacts their private parts. So you find that a woman will suffer a lot due to these activities. And these are things they are even embarrassed to talk about, because as professional women, yes, we'll make a lot of noise, or we need to be included, you'll get promoted, you'll be given a seat at the table. But when we're talking about the unprofessional women who are actually involved in small mining, then the challenges are different, because you have to take into consideration the financial challenges like I've mentioned, but besides the financial challenges, you also look at the cultural restraints, because in most cases, some of the cultures will undermine the role of a woman in not only the mining sector or the oil and gas sector, but also other sectors, because some traditions, they're still backward. They believe a woman's place is in the kitchen, even though that woman actually has the capability to contribute positively to the sector, but because of those cultures and traditions, they'll be laid back. So you have like the financial constraints, you have the cultural constraints, and also the laws themselves. I'll give an example of land laws, because access to land is very key in the successful operation of both energy and mining activities. But you'll find in most countries, like Kenya, you have the customary land system. In Uganda, we have the customary land system. Also, other African countries, they have the customary land system. And most of these systems, they discriminate against women. So if a woman cannot have access to land, how can she even take part in these activities? So you look at our laws, you look at our traditions and cultures, and then you also look at the financial constraints. And the other thing that is really important, especially for small scale mining, is the issue of technology, because in most cases, these activities, they're male dominated because they also require a lot of energy. But if most of these activities, let's say small scale miners, embrace digitalization and technology, you'll find that women will be open to take part in these activities, because with technology, you don't really need to use a lot of energy that a man would have used to do some of these, to carry out some of these activities. So in summary, I would categorize the constraints to gender and diversity into three. The first being the political constraints, and then the second one, the legal constraints, like I mentioned, when you look at our land laws and other laws, because obviously in the Constitution you'll find where they're promoting equality for both men and women. And then the third one will be the financial constraints. If women don't have access to finances, when will I, Victoria Nalole, ever start a mining company or an energy company if I don't have access to capital? And then the third one will be the issue of digitalization and technology. So as we're trying to address the issues of gender inequality, we have to look at the professional women like us who are here discussing, but we should also not forget about the unprofessional women and the unique challenges we face.
Dr. Hinton, Dr. Naluli has spoken extensively about the mining industry and particularly artisanal mining. Anything that you feel could also
It's
add
quite
to?
similar to what. Okay, I was saying that it's quite similar to what Dr. Victoria has said, that most of the time has to do with finance and issues to do with technology. But to add to that, one of the major issues has to do with the family commitment of women in the oil and gas industry. Most women have been assigned certain roles such that they have high family commitments more than the men. And because of that, when they are assigned roles that require them to be at work probably at night or at late hours where they have to attend to their children, it creates a lot of problems. So even though research indicates that oil and gas industry, a lot of women have had the opportunity of rising up, but they don't rise to the high managerial positions because of the issues to do with family commitment. That is one. The second issue also still has to do with gender ideologies. As has already been said, most people still think the woman's place is in the kitchen. So at every point in time, even if the woman is well educated and all that, when they are recruiting, subconsciously, they try to employ more of the men than the women, because an HR person would assume that if I engage a woman, if she has not given birth, give her a couple of months or years, she would end up having to go for a maternal leave, and that would affect my output. So that also has an issue. The other thing to add is the issue to with harassment. There is record showing that there's a lot of harassment in the industry. And this is reflected in the research carried by a group of researchers. We have Mrs. Georgette Wright. She carries out a lot of research in the Ghanaian setting, particularly when it has to do with gender balance, active industries, and the extractive industries, oil and gas and mining in Ghana as well as in the US. So it covers quite a number of people, and all those who undertook the interviews and answered the questionnaires, at least 35% of them admitted being sexually harassed. So this is a great issue as well. Aside that, we have lack of support in the oil and gas industry. Because of the trauma that, as I've already pointed out, most women face in the industry, they don't eventually rise up. So we don't have people mentoring the young ones coming into the industry. They come in, and the moment they are faced with a little bit of discrimination, they give up. So these account for the low numbers in the oil and gas industry, particularly in Africa, Ghana, and the US, based on the research done so far.
Thank you, Dr. Appiah. Probably just to mention to our attendees as we go along, we want this to be an engaging discourse. If you have any questions, please feel free to raise your hand, put a question in the chat box, and our panelists will attend to that. Dr. Hinton, just as we speak to the factors that are attributed to the gender gap, something that Dr. Appiah has mentioned or has alluded to, say maternity leave. People will say biologically and naturally, you will lag behind because you'll have to take, say, 3-4 months, depending on the legal regime of wherever you are. Or naturally, you're not as strong enough, say in artisanal mining, you're not as strong enough to perform the same roles physically as the men would. So what's your opinion on that?
I think in terms of things like maternity leave, childcare, pregnancy, I think larger responsible companies are definitely in the last 5 years starting to put in place policies and systems that actually support that. You know, it's been pretty openly recognized. It is more of a challenge, say, for artisanal miners on that side of the spectrum. But realistically, you know, depending on the law of the land, a lot of the women will go back to work. I would think that all of these things kind of go back to which was mentioned earlier, some of these norms, beliefs, and values about masculinity, femininity. We think of how a man is valued for being strong and powerful, whether he is or he isn't, for being vocal, for being authoritative, etc. How women may be valued for you know, performing some of these traditional roles of looking after children, staying at home in the kitchen. Some of these norms, beliefs, and values can actually, you know, they underpin kind of everything. If you think of an example of a culture where, you know, a mine will be located and women are valued for being quiet or submissive, that starts from when you're a young girl. So by the time you get to the point of where you want to speak up, say in response to harassment, or speak out against unfair policies, you know, discrimination in hiring, etc., have you acquired the skills, or has society contained that, those skills? And we think also, you know, these beliefs can also be coming from the household and the community. I was doing an assessment in Rwanda quite a few years ago of these small, medium scale, there were companies, they were formal, these companies, and they were actually hiring a lot of women, and they'd, you know, go to work and have full coveralls, hard hats, boots, but the whole community viewed them as doing sex work because they were working in the mines. There was a belief that you're doing sex work. And so, you know, in one case, women were kicked out of their church because they worked in the mines. So it's not just with the companies and you know, what's happening at the mine. It can be at the family level and community level. And I've heard the same, even a woman in a fairly high position with a large scale mining company in Tanzania, who the same thing, her extended family, you know, believed that because she was working in that environment, she was engaged in sex work. So we can't really, you know, these systematic things that are not mining sector specific or extractive specific, but these things that create and perpetuate gender inequalities are things that we need to challenge. And especially having men as allies and understanding this, you know, and on a practical level, it might translate to a policy that is discriminatory because women might become pregnant, for example. But these are things that we need to tackle on a practical level. I can comment about the strength thing. I don't know further if you want.
Sorry, how about the physical strength in terms of particularly, say, in artisanal mining? What would your comments be about that?
Yeah, it's funny because I have, you know, historically done quite a bit of research on this issue, and it's not a valid argument. There's different jobs at the mine that are valued differently, and also women are different. You know, I might be too small and weak, but I mean, I know a woman in Tanzania. She pretended to be a man for 6 years in the Tanzanite mines, and she was doing the work with the men. And, you know, women in Uganda that are using sluice boxes, but if you go to Eastern DRC in the tin mines, there's this perception that it makes women infertile if you use the sluice boxes, but they're doing it in Uganda. And it actually has more to do with who gets, you know, the jobs that pay more money. There's a lot of different jobs. We can't really stereotype that every woman has a certain physicality, and we can't stereotype that every man is physically capable. You know, there is a need to think in terms of occupational health and safety science, and it is important that perception about needing to protect women, and sometimes in policy and law, actually can serve against women's interests. There's an example in DRC and Rwanda had a law banning pregnant women from mine sites, and so you'd have a small, medium scale industrial company. And they didn't know how to enforce this policy. They've got security guards, they've got that are women, they've got accountants that are women, they've got people doing different jobs with different physical requirements, but it was a blanket ban to protect women. In the Eastern DRC, at some sites, this actually translated to the cooperatives enforcing a ban on sometimes all women, or a ban on women that might be pregnant, or a ban on elderly women. And all it did was actually make these women more vulnerable. There wasn't much science or occupational health and safety science behind it. It had more to do with this perception that we have to protect women and they're all weak. We have to protect women's safety and health for sure, but we can't assume that every job is the same. We can't assume every scenario is the same, and we can't assume every woman is like this and every man is like that in terms of physical capacity.
Thank you, Dr. Hinton. Maslin Odeo asks, what are the gender gap issues experienced in acquiring qualifications in academics in terms of oil and gas? Dr. Appiah, please.
In the oil and gas industry, I must say there has been some measures put in place to promote access to education. So in that sector, we don't have a lot of women not having access as compared to those in the mining. And the reason I'm saying this is I know Dr. Hinton is has more expertise in the mining industry, but you see some laws have been put in place to protect women. And some of the laws are actually hindrances. The International Labour Organization Convention 45, which says women should not work in the mines at night. So although different from the mining industry, the oil and gas, we don't have those kind of measures in place to prevent women from accessing either education or the workplace, the employment. So for the oil and gas, some of the causes of the gaps is the fact that, one, although women have access to education because of the policies put in place to encourage a lot of female, the girl child being educated, once they are employed, if they go offshore, for instance, access to certain working conditions, particularly for the woman, creates a disincentive. And therefore, more women are not more willing to go into the oil and gas, and therefore the numbers are reduced, and that creates the gap. So for oil and gas, we don't have, based on the research carried out, this is a very recent research, 2021, we don't have those challenges as faced by those in the mining industry. It is quite easier for people to have access to education, except if it has to do with cultural prejudices, that this is not a career for a woman, or an issue to do with finance. Those are the two main issues that create or contribute to the gap of the gender gap in the oil and gas industry for women.
One more person asks, could the panelists throw more light on the issue of gender and how it influences access and equitable access to energy? Dr. Nalule, perhaps you can take this.
All right, I think that's an issue of energy access. And I've written a lot on energy access. I have a book on energy access and energy poverty. And what I can say with respect to energy access and gender inequality, you look at the types of energy being used, because you'll find in most rural areas in African countries or even in Asia, most rural communities, they rely on traditional energy, that is biomass, including firewood, including charcoal. And given the social roles of women, including cooking and the housework, it implies that women will spend a lot of time utilizing this traditional energy. I'll give an example. If you go in countries in East Africa, or even in West Africa and Southern Africa, women in rural areas will spend a lot of time fetching firewood because of the social works that are given to women, implying that the issue of energy access escalates gender inequalities. Because for women in, let's say, urban areas or women in the developed countries, you find that the social work is made easy. Now, like in the UK and other countries, a woman will easily cook using the gas stove. they'll have a washing machine with them. So they're not going to spend a lot of time doing the social work. But then if you go in the villages, if a woman is supposed to cook, that means they need to have access to firewood. We cannot forget the negative impacts associated with traditional energy, including indoor air pollution. So energy poverty or energy access escalates gender inequality because a woman will spend a lot of time using traditional energy, which not only limits them, for instance, the girls, they will be limited and most of them will not get a chance to even acquire an education because they have to start home and help out their parents with their social work, including fetching firewood, cooking, and so on and so forth. So the issue of energy access, actually, most scholars, including myself, we have termed it as a gendered issue because without access to modern energy, you'll find it's mostly the women who are going to suffer the negative consequences associated with traditional energy, including biomass, charcoal, firewood, to mention but a few.
Thank you, Dr. Nalule. Feel free as we go along, please do ask questions in the chat. Just raise your hand so that we can enable you to speak and ask your question. So we're at the point where Dr. Hinton mentioned that there are no really physical barriers when it comes to men and women or biological barriers. Dr. Nalule, also, you have also a lot of experience and you've written a lot about artisanal mining. In your experience and in the literature that you come across, and in your own opinion, do you think there are any biological barriers?
Yes, they are. But it depends on the kind of mining in question. So I've done research in the gold mining areas, but I've also done research in salt mining. And you notice in most literature or most experts forget about salt mining. This is mining and it has a lot of negative impacts, especially to the women. So I'll give the example of salt mining. The biological barriers will be, because I mentioned earlier, most of these artisanal miners, they get involved in these activities without protective gears. So the biological barriers will be the impact that a woman is likely to suffer due to these activities. I give an example of ammonia gas that comes out of the salt water. This ammonia gas has caused a lot of infertilities among women. So you'll find that most women are restrained from taking part in salt mining because of the negative impacts that directly impact on their biological system or reproductive system. That's an example of salt mining. And then generally, I would agree with Jennifer. There are no such things as biological barriers, but I think it's the we will say the physical abilities. Yes, you'll find some women who are strong, but generally women were not that strong to be involved in some mining activities that involve, let's say, going into the mine pits. Myself, I would not have that kind of power or energy to be involved in those activities. So that's why you find that in most cases, it's the men, especially for small-scale mining, it's the men who go into these pits. I'll also give an example of sand mining, because I know most people also tend to miss out on issues of sand mining. For sand mining, especially on a small scale, the men have to dig. And if you go in all the mines, you'll find it's mostly the men because of those physical abilities. Obviously, there are some women who are strong. There's some women who can endure and work in these hard circumstances, but that's like, let's say, 2%. So that's where the issue of biological barriers comes in. But it's only common in artisanal and small-scale mining, because like I mentioned, with this in the 21st century, we're moving towards digitalization. So in most mining communities or large-scale mining companies, they are already digitalized, they're embracing technology. So anyone can actually take part in the mining activities without playing the card of biological barriers.
Thank you, Dr. Nalule. And on that note, one of the issues also we want to address, because this webinar is about gender, gender. So do you, as our panelists, and I think I'll give each panelist an opportunity to address this. Do you think there are any unique issues? We've already talked about the unique issues facing women, and do you think there are any unique issues that face men in the extractive industry? If Dr. Appiah could go first.
Okay, I think just like the women, sometimes the men also face the same, but the unique issue that I think the men face in the extractive industry has to do with sometimes the low salaries being paid to them, irrespective of the fact that sometimes they are qualified, because they are working with certain companies. They are not paid enough for the work done. Apart from that, there's no unique challenge that I think the men face. They are similar to what the women face, either due to safety issues, that's inadequate, maybe safety gears to wear, or poor working conditions, or lack of health facilities to treat them when needed. Those are the only things I think they really face. My apologies to the men if they assume that we are relegating them to the background and that we are not appreciating the challenges that they may go through. Let me just say that sometimes the men also point out that in our quest as women to fight for the rights of our fellow women, they are often also relegated to the background. So that is one challenge. That's the only unique thing I think that really stands out. And anytime when there's a job opportunity, because of the issues to do with equity, which we are trying to use to promote gender justice, sometimes when they apply for jobs they are entitled to, the men are also denied the opportunity and given to the women. I think that's the only unique thing I would find that the men would face.
Thank you, Dr. Kosi Appiah. Dr. Hinton, what's your view? Do you think there are any unique challenges that men face?
Yeah, I think again we go back to this issue of stereotypes about men. You know what it is to be masculine. You know, are you strong, gregarious, outspoken? If we look at that spectrum again, artisanal to large scale, if you have large companies that are responsible, they're putting massive attention to occupational health and safety and working conditions. A lot of responsible companies now have anti-bullying policies, anti-harassment policies that also apply to men. Bullying, harassment. Recently, I saw a presentation from a guy from South Africa who was researching how gay men are stigmatized and psychologically abused and discriminated against and bullied in large-scale industrial mines in South Africa. We have stereotypes about, oh, you can't complain about, is that working condition too dangerous? If you're a strong man and you're not afraid, those stereotypes can have a lot of psychological damage. But the other end of the spectrum is there a risk that some men in certain conditions will take more risks, and these hazardous jobs in particular. If we look at the other end of the spectrum, artisanal mines, you can have a lot of the diggers, these guys going underground are 16 to 25-year-old young men, where I've literally seen them cheering each other on, be a man, be a man, be a man, to take risks. And a lot of the majority of fatalities in the artisanal mining end of the spectrum are actually these young men who do take the risk. They're digging the rat holes, they're working in unsafe conditions. They come out of the hole at the end of the day, everyone cheers. Those stereotypes actually can produce really negative impacts. And again, what if you don't fit the stereotype? What if you're not, so perpetuating these stereotypes is bad for men, and men, I think, suffer from that as well. Whether it's a formal, responsible company and, you're worried about being stigmatized about reporting an issue or an incident or harassment, or whether there's no company bunch of artisanal miners. You know, I think those beliefs about gender and masculinity can also negatively impact men.
Thank you, Dr. Hinton. Dr. Nalule, your opinion, your views?
All right, so I don't think there are unique challenges to men. They're just general challenges that all the miners are facing for the instances of artisanal small-scale mining, the issue of lack of protective equipment, the issue of the reliance on rudimentary methods to mine, lack of finances. So all those are issues that are really common to men and women. But I would like to point out the political part of it, where women have been used as weapons of war in countries like, let's say, the DRC, especially during the political instability. Though this is an issue that directly affects women, you'll find in most cases that where women are used as weapons of war in mining communities, it is to stop the men from going or from undertaking these mining activities. So you find that if a male miner knows that if I'm to take part or to be involved in mining activities in a certain area where the rebels don't want us to really get involved in, my family is going to be raped, my wife is going to be raped, my daughters are going to be raped, then that will be an issue that is unique to a man, because they're using women as weapons of war to stop the men from carrying out these activities. So that's also another issue actually we had forgot to highlight. In instances of political instability, how are men affected? How are women affected? Yes, the rape is directly on a woman, or it's directly affecting the woman, but as a husband, as a brother, as a father, you'll be concerned that, oh, I wouldn't want my family to go through this. So they'll definitely have to restrain from carrying out mining activities. So politically, that's something I will say that is unique to the men. But the other thing, when we're talking about the uniqueness of these challenges, we can categorize the challenges that are unique to the men who are involved in artisanal small-scale mining, like the challenges I mentioned. And then there are challenges that are unique to the men who are involved in large-scale mining. And then there are also challenges generally that are unique to the professional men and the challenges that are unique to the unprofessional men. So with respect to the uniqueness of the challenges, we need to categorize first what kind of sector we're talking about, and also the kind of professionalism that is needed in that sector. And also, most importantly, the issue of political stability, because you'll find that the men who are in the DRC Congo or in countries that are politically unstable, they will have unique challenges that the men who are in politically stable countries are not experiencing. But one of those challenges politically would be the issue of rape, which is used as a weapon of war to ensure that the men restrain from carrying out mining activities in a disputed area.
Thank you, Dr. Nalule. I see we have a question. Priscilla Brandt, I can see your hand is up. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello to all the panelists, and please allow me to thank you for sharing all your insights. I have a question which relates to, are there any internationally recognized baseline tests that governments and the private sector are required to carry out in more effectively measuring in-country contributions towards achieving gender parity within the extractor's value chain? Because I'd just like to know if there's anything that's internationally recognized that would prompt countries to take more of an interventionist approach towards capturing data and efforts made to bridge the gap, or rather the gender disparities that women continue to face. Thank you.
Thank you, Priscilla. Dr. Hinton, perhaps if you could take that.
Sure. There's no sort of universal baseline assessment tools or tests. What we do see, though, now I'm talking about large-scale responsible companies that, especially public companies, are required now to report more and more on environmental social governance factors, ESG factors. And the great thing is not just stock exchanges are expecting it, but the markets, the banks that finance the mining sector are expecting this of large responsible companies. And gender has increased, has received considerable attention. And part of that attention and the requirement and expectation is to report on transparently. So that includes employment, not just company-wide, but at different levels. Even in terms of delivering community benefits, in terms of working with communities and community engagement. So that's positive. And there's a lot of international guidance and tools. The most common is the Global Reporting Initiative, which does have, pretty good in terms of having a gender lens in terms of how and what we report. And that provides an opportunity to systematize. I'm a big advocate in terms of national mining laws. There are very specific requirements and regulations on how you report. So, you're expected to report on employment. Well, okay, what percentage are men and women? Why don't you ask us to do that? It seems like a no-brainer. You're expected to report on your community engagement activities. Okay, at the very least, report on, what percentage men and women are a part of that engagement strategy. But that hasn't really been reflected in mining laws so far. I don't think there's an international universal tool or a test that companies or governments are required to do, but at least things are moving in that direction. The drivers are there. These market pressures are positive. The UN guiding principles on business and human rights, I understand is almost moving towards becoming part of EU law. I see in your question, you look at this issue of value chains or supply chains. So that would, if that does make it into a regulation, say for the EU, any companies whose products end up in a supply chain or a value chain in the EU would necessarily have to report on those things. And another really positive thing on the company side are, companies are expected to have requirements and expectations for their supply chains. So companies that provide goods and services to you, you can have expectations for them in terms of their targets with respect to gender and other things, and their performance and even their reporting and disclosure. But it is a good question. If you're working on an international tool, that would be great. It would be welcome. On the artisanal mining side, I guess my comment is also, again, in the law, can we ask simple things of artisanal mining? The artisanal miners, if they're expected to form either a cooperative or association, what is the percentage of women and men reflected in the leadership of that co-op and association? What is the percentage of membership? And then going a step further, how can we ensure that participation is actually meaningful? What can we put into, say, mining laws to move that in that direction?
Thank you so much, Dr. Hinton. Dr. Appiah, just moving seamlessly from the discussion that Dr. Hinton has been having with us, what would your comments be about the regulatory space towards achieving gender justice? Dr. Appiah, I understand now that, just like Dr. Hinton has mentioned, there's no global instrument that sets the thresholds. What would your comments be on the regulatory space regionally, whether there's any regional regulation or legislation or instruments rather?
First of all, although there's no rigid global instrument requiring that companies do disclose, we have the 2019 Extractive Industry Transparency Standard Gender, which requires that companies consider gender balance in their representation and disclose employment data by company and gender and occupational level. So it addresses gender considerations in terms of dissemination. So the companies are encouraged to disclose the number of women they've engaged and at what levels. We also have the Oxfam Gender Assessment Toolkit, which has been also developed to encourage companies and the industry, the extractive industry, to promote the reportage of the gender or the women they engage in their industry as compared to their men, and the levels at which they also engage them. Now, looking at the global regulatory framework, we already have in existence a lot of laws in place. We could talk of the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women, which some of the provisions are well replicated in the International Covenant on the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, which requires that women be given opportunity to work and carry out the work of their choice. They should also be paid equally, just like the men. Those are international regulations, but as has already been confirmed, enforcing them is an issue. It's up to the countries to ratify them and implement them in their national laws. On the regional level, I would look at the African Development Bank's operational safeguards, which requires clients to consider gender and vulnerability issues as part of the process of identifying and assessing and managing potential environmental and social risks, which I'm assuming would also then consider gender risk. So as at now, I think the consensus or what is being advocated for is that we should have a gender, just like when we have assessment, when they start their work. That would be a great tool, so that at every point in time, when you're about to start operation in the extractive industry, you inform us, this is the impact it's going to have on the gender balance, or the number of people, the number of women you're going to engage in your work. And this should be also periodical. It shouldn't just be at the beginning. At some number of, maybe a couple of a year, you should report, give us a feedback, constant feedback. So that even if, because I must say, even when countries have these laws, remember I mentioned the international framework, legal frameworks, which protect women's rights, their right to equal work and all that. But it has to do, the problem we are facing now has to do with the implementation and accountability. So even if we implement these, the need to account to people on regular basis as to exactly how we're implementing these is important. So in brief, this is what we have for the global, the regional, but much work is needed to be done by the various countries.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kusi-Appiah. Now we see there has been progress. Definitely, we are not there yet. We are still witnessing a gap. And Dr. Nalule, what do you think are the short-term measures that we can do, short-term and even long-term, that we can undertake as practitioners, and any recommendations, for instance, to improve the legal framework so that we can further reduce this gap?
Like Dr. Franca mentioned, in most cases, the issue is not with the legal framework, because the laws are there at the national level, the laws are there at the international level, and also at a regional level. We already have laws that are advocating for gender equality in the mining sector and in the energy sector entirely. But just to repeat what Frank has mentioned, the issue here is on implementation of these laws. So we have to look at implementation at different levels. We'll have to look at implementation at the national level. Obviously, we have already seen instances where countries are putting into place the local content provisions that, although they're focused on empowering the local people, but also women can benefit from these provisions. But specifically, we have to look at the entire life cycle of a mining project or even an oil and gas project, and be sure that at every stage of that life cycle, women are represented. We shouldn't look at the end result of maybe development, and then we start asking, are the women represented in this stage? We should start from the first stage of the project life cycle, including issues of negotiations. How many women do attend these negotiations? Because negotiation is key in the oil and gas sector. Negotiation is key in the mining sector. But you find in most cases, during the negotiations, it will only be the men. and then they'll claim, oh, women are included because, or maybe women are involved in the mining sector, or they're involved in the development, or they're involved in other stages. But the key issue here is, with respect to implementation, we have to ensure that women are represented at every life cycle of a project, starting from negotiations, starting from recruitment. We ensure that the women, a number of women are also recruited on issues of exploration. Women should be involved in the exploration. When it comes to the development, women should be involved in the development. And even at the end of the value chain, including marketing, and in instances of maybe the downstream in the oil and gas sector, women should be represented. So we should not only focus on representation at only one stage of the project life cycle, because that will mean that in all the other stages, it's the male who are being given these opportunities. Because the issue here with respect to gender equality, the issue is opportunities, equality to opportunities. And if we are to be practical about implementing these laws, because the laws are already there. You look at in most employment laws, they will emphasize gender equality. Most labor laws will emphasize gender equality. Even the mining laws themselves, they will emphasize gender equality. But now we have to look at implementation and find practical ways of implementing these laws. And in my opinion, I believe one of the ways to do this is to ensure that women are represented at every life cycle of a mining project and an oil and gas project, including negotiations up to the rehabilitation or decommissioning stage. So that would be it for me, because we already have different initiatives, but the issue is how are we going to implement these initiatives in a practical way? So that will be my suggestion.
Thank you, Dr. Nalule. Very practical suggestions there. Dr. Hinton, what can we do to make this better?
Well, I did, just following, the last comments about implementation. I think we have, when I showed the spectrum, we have a lot of work happening in artisanal and small scale mining, and a lot of projects, support projects, either by or with government or donors or organizations, where gender is now, it's pretty normalized to address gender in these projects and support gender equality in artisanal. Then we have big companies, the BHPs, the Rio Tintos, that have a lot of resources and make commitments, like BHP, for example. I think their target was 50% women employees by 2025. We have other large companies making these commitments. But there's, in between, some countries, the whole mining sector are just medium scale, small scale, and they're under the radar. This is where the implementation gap is massive, because they're under the radar, and some of them want to do things, but they don't have the tools. So I did want to highlight two important tools. The World Bank IFC has a toolkit called Unlocking Opportunities for Women in Business, with one toolkit focused explicitly on mining companies. And it's excellent reference even for those developing policy and law. And then on the artisanal end of the spectrum, an organization called Impact is developing a number of gender impact assessment and gender assessment tools for artisanal small scale mining. They just launched a toolkit for gender impact assessment for artisanal mining policy and law. And then my final comment, because large big companies have a lot of these international pressures. They have whole departments sort of looking at what are the international conventions, what do we need to do for EITI, and looking at that compliance. In between, there's a lot of companies that I know that are much smaller, and they do kind of need that list in law, or that requirement to be in law. And so if we've seen this massive wave of policy and legal reforms in Africa over the last decade and very recent years, there's a huge focus on community engagements going into law, community benefit agreement, impact benefit agreements going into law, local content strategies going into law. I see those laws being huge opportunities, because often it's implied you have to benefit the community, but who in the community? There's not really requirements to report on and going back to this question about data, why are we not asked to legally do this? It doesn't mean you have to be 100%, but we need to get the data to see if we're actually making progress. And once those things become normalized, it becomes a normal thing. It was like occupational safety and health for big companies in the 70s, and environmental requirements in the 80s for large companies. It became normal. It's normalized. So we need to normalize gender equality in the mining sector, and I think that's a step towards it. I think another thing that we haven't spoken about that could help to improve things we talk about mining policy and law, but what about mining institutions? Who's working at those institutions, and what are we expecting and asking of them? Laws are very good about asking mining companies to do A, B, C, D, but what are we requiring, say, government agencies, mining ministries to do? And in terms of this performance, are they implementing, are they inspecting in terms of gender targets at the very least, in terms of employment, but also in terms of working conditions, company policies, etc. I did want to highlight as a positive example, which I'm really proud about, being here in Uganda. Uganda just released new mining licensing regulations, and there is a requirement you can't even apply for a license unless you have a gender policy. It's a baby step, but it's a good step. So, I think examples like that are useful.
Thank you, Dr. Hinton. We have a question. The Africa Mining Vision, in brackets AMV, calls for a gender and ethnically inclusive mining sector. Does the AMV go far enough in its stipulations for gender equality? And if not, what are the implications for AMV domestication in national laws, policies on gender and mining, leading on from the AU's AMV continent-wide? Dr. Nalule, perhaps if you want to take this.
So the African Mining Vision definitely has ambitious provisions and ambitious goals, but the key issue here, even with respect to gender equality and implementation of the provisions of the African Mining Vision with respect to gender equality, there needs to be a political will, because we need to look at the African Mining Vision as a regional initiative, a regional instrument, and just like any other instrument or regional or international instrument, for them to be effective in the countries, the countries should have the political will to actually implement these provisions. But like I mentioned, if you're to look at the national laws, most national laws in the African countries, they are already advocating for gender equality, including other principles that are being emphasized in the African Mining Vision. So the issue is not about replicating the provisions of the African Mining Vision into the national constitutions or the national legislations, but the issue remains of political will for the countries to actually do that, but also the political will to implement whatever provisions they're getting from the African Mining Vision in their countries, because it's no longer a matter of theories and provisions, because we have had theories and provisions with respect to gender equality, and that is enough. Now the issue is about implementation and ensuring that we are practical in whatever initiatives we are taking. So in short, for the African Mining Vision to be effective in African countries, there should be political will from these countries to not only adopt these provisions, but also implement them in a practical manner, as they should be implementing all the other international instruments that are advocating for gender equality, not only in the mining sector, but also other sectors.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nalule. We are now approaching the home stretch. We have 15 minutes to go. And there's a question, there's somebody with particular interest in Ghana, and she has a question for you, Dr. Appiah, and she asks, please, are there any identifiable women interest groups in the extractive industry in Ghana? If so, how are they influencing the various state actors to help in the implementation of the law to aid women in the extractive industry? And there's also a call for mentorship for you to lead a mentorship group in Ghana. Dr. Appiah, please.
All right. Thank you very much. Yes, we do have quite a few initiatives which are gender focused. For the mining, we have Women in Mining, led by Mrs. Georgette Bansich Addo. They've been aiming, particularly at different levels, in fact, local, national levels. So they've been supporting the women in the mining sector at different levels extensively. They've been promoting the inclusiveness of women at various consultative levels, and also been supporting the women in the extractive industry, particularly mining, and providing working gears and whatnot for them, promoting health protection. For the oil and gas, we also have the Women in Energy, which was established in 2012 as well. So yes, we do have women gender initiatives in Ghana, and I'm I'm more than willing to mentor as well, no problem. So please do join all these initiatives to promote gender equality or gender justice in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Kusi Appiah. Perhaps if we could get final comments, final thoughts, any policy directions or any interest or any opinions, final closing opinions from our panelists as we head towards a close. Dr. Hinton, please.
Sure. Just as a follow-up on organization of women in the sector, people can look up an organization called International Women in Mining, and it's a private sector organization, and they, as I understand it, have hundreds of women in mining organizations in countries all over the world. There's quite a few in Africa that are linked under this umbrella. So getting organizations and countries to talk to each other. And I believe that there is a move towards, this mentoring and support function, but also a lot of it is advocacy for women in the sector and private sector in particular. I think things are moving in the right direction in general, where there's a lot of momentum. Forums such as this are extremely important. I'm glad I failed to recognize, for example, EITI, but some of these international initiatives that do have a lot of impact now are adapting and recognizing the importance of gender equality. I think we're moving in that direction, but it's going to take time, and it'll take commitment. It will take leadership from both women and men that are in a position to be leaders and support, transforming mindsets about how important this really is. And ultimately, whether or not the mining sector actually translates to development or not, and equality of benefits, depends on progress in this direction. And I wish I could remember the name of the woman who heads the Women in Mining organization in Zimbabwe. I failed to remember her name, but I have this quote etched in my brain where she stood up in front of a huge panel of mostly private sector, UN people, government, and she said, the minerals of Africa are supposed to benefit the people of Africa. Women constitute 50% of the population. We demand 50% of the benefits. So it's so obvious. So we need to do a lot to move in that direction. But thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Hinton, for sparing time to be with us. Dr. Nalili, any final comments?
In my concluding remarks, I would like to emphasize the need to find tailored solutions to the gender injustice in different regions, in different countries. Because in most cases, yes, we do have the international instruments, we do have the regional instruments, and we also have the national instruments. But you find that people or women who are mostly impacted by the extractive sector, they're women in rural communities. And like I mentioned, the issue of traditions and cultures is not going to go away with the national laws or international laws. There is a need for effective education and training for these people in rural countries, in the rural communities, to ensure that they accept women as being equal to men economically, not physically or in other way. Because women who mostly suffer the negative impacts associated with mining or oil and gas activities, these are the local women in rural areas who are involved in agriculture, who are involved in agriculture, including farming, fishing. So this pollution will definitely have an impact on land use. And it's the women who are mostly using land in rural areas. And yet, in most cases, gender inequalities are hidden in those areas. So whereas we are taking the discussion forward at an international level, at the national level, we need to find tailored solutions to the tailored challenges faced, to the tailored challenges and unique challenges faced by the different women in the different tribes. Because we can talk about Kenya and we'll think, oh, Kenya, all the women are facing the same challenges. But there are certain tribes in Kenya, like there's certain tribes in my country, in Uganda, where the gender inequalities are very deep. And it will not take just a mere existence of a national law or international law to get rid of these gender inequalities. You have to find tailored solutions that can actually apply to that specific tribe, let's say in Eastern Uganda. But then you'll find that a tribe in Northern Uganda or Central Uganda, they have those unique challenges they're facing. So the issue of gender inequality, for it to be eliminated, we have to look at the women who are mostly impacted by these gender inequalities. And these are the women in rural areas. And then we have to be practical enough and realize that each region and each tribe or even culture, they face those unique challenges. So it will be a lot of work at the national level to actually try to find tailored solutions to some of these unique challenges faced by these different tribes, different regions, so that they can effectively eliminate gender inequality. But if we are to just discuss it at the international level and think that we're going to use the same principles to apply at a local level, then we're getting it wrong. So it's time for us to be a little bit practical by looking at the practical challenges and finding the unique solutions to some of the unique challenges faced by different people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Nalule. That's important, that we need to actually tailor solutions to the unique problems that face us. Dr. Kusi Appiah, let's have your final comments, please.
In support of all that has been said, yes, education is important, and reorientation is also important so that we can have a changed perspective of the roles of both men and women. Again, we should also try to promote women who own small and medium enterprises. And here it still emphasizes the fact that the laws and policies have made provision for equality. But at this point, equity has to be applied. We have to cushion the women a bit to get them to a particular point where they will be at par with the men and they can work on their own. So we should try and promote a lot of the small, medium enterprises that the women are involved in, particularly in the extractive industries. And yes, companies should also be encouraged as much as possible to carry out the gender impact assessments with constant reporting, because accountability is essential. And as pointed out by Dr. Hinton, accountability requires the role of the regulators as well. So we need the regulators to have competencies in gender issues. We need someone who understands gender issues to be or to occupy the position of the regulators, so that when they're implementing the policies and the laws, they would appreciate gender issues much better. So in brief, this is it. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kusi Appiah. At this point, I can see there are no questions that we have not addressed, and our panelists have given their final comments. Thank you so much for gracing us with your presence, for giving us 1.5 hours of your time to have this discussion. And I'm sure our attendees and all of us have really learned a lot. We have ticked our brains to think about something new and to work towards making a difference in future. All our panelists are PhD holders, and I'm sure they're inspiring. And especially since this debate has been on gender justice, they're inspiring a lot of us and a lot of women to keep pursuing high positions and pursuing education. So thank you so much for being with us all the way, Dr. Nalule from University of Dundee, Dr. Jennifer Hinton, who's doing her work both in Uganda and Canada, Dr. Kusi Apia in Ghana. I have been your moderator for this discussion. My name is Cynthia Opakas. I'm associate at Triple OK Law LLP in Kenya, and presently pursuing my LLM at the University of Dundee. So I hope we are ending on time. It's very important to end on time. So thank you, all of you. Sure. Please go ahead.
Yeah, before we close, I would like to recognize our esteemed colleagues from the Uganda Revenue Authority, especially Mr. Evans Mwesigwa, who facilitated this discussion, and through his contacts, were able to get hold of me, Dr. Jennifer. So thank you very much, Uganda Revenue Authority. Thank you very much, Evans Mwesigwa, for all your support. And thank you very much, our panelists. And do not forget to register for the webinar on the 19th of February about stabilization clauses in the petroleum agreements.
Thank you so much. The session has been recorded. So in the event anybody wants to refer to this in future, please, it will be available to you. Thank you so much. Have a good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are.